Everything you hear in this story is fictional. Any resemblance to any persons or events is purely coincidental.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.
Episode 3. Perhaps the cruelest part of memory is our ability to pinpoint the moments where things went off course. A conversation, a match point, a left turn taken too soon. You can play in your mind over and over what you remember and what you wish you did. This is what led Nicolina to give her memories to nostalgia. Very few people ever knew about her relationship with Ben and the life she almost had. When Josh questioned Nicolina later on this, she blinked away tears. Josh hadn't ever once seen Nicolina cry. Not when any of her relationships broke down, not at her father's funeral, not at her daughter Alette's graduation. Not even when George, Alette's father, had managed to gain temporary custody of 4-year-old Alette over some egregious lies he told in court. But the tears were there on the edges of her eyes when Nicolina explained that she had fancied Ben right from the day she met him at the festival. He was both mysterious and exacting. He wasn't afraid to tell her exactly what he thought of her attitude and her clothes, but his eyes held a tenderness his mouth didn't. She wanted to know more, but he was always with one girl after another. Nicolina was used to being chased and adored, so she dismissed him as an option, though secretly hoped he might devote his interest to her one day. There was an undeniable thrum that went through her body every time she saw him. They all became closer once Ashley and Manu started dating, and the thrum accelerated to a base. Nicolina would sometimes catch Ben looking at her, and be sure he was feeling the same way, and other times he didn't even seem to notice when she arrived at a party. She met George, a Canadian property developer, in 2015, just a year after meeting Ben. George was gregarious, clever, and flashy. He wasn't afraid to splash cash on Nicolina and show her off, which she thoroughly enjoyed. Nicolina loved to walk into rooms with George, but often found the entrance the best part of her nights with him. When she brought George around to her friends, she knew they didn't really like him much, but they tolerated him for her sake. George talked too much about things they didn't understand or had no interest in, and he either didn't notice or didn't care. They dated for 2 years before George proposed in 2017. He made them go on the London Eye and rented a private boat to spell out "Marry me, Nikki" on its rooftop as it sailed past. It was waiting for them at the bottom when they came off for a private tour down the Thames. Ben didn't say a word when Nicolina had told them all. A few weeks after the proposal, George had to go back to Canada for a family wedding, so Nicolina had attended Tessa's 25th birthday party alone. She shared an Uber home with Ben and Mav. Mav talked the entire way until he got out, leaving Nicolina and Ben in the same silence they had been in for 3 weeks. Nicolina was not one for awkwardness, but she cared too much what Ben thought in this case, so she asked if there was a problem. She said Ben had looked at her intently for a moment, and she thought he was going to scream words of disgust at her. Instead, they were words of disgust for George and the life she was agreeing to. He said George made her the worst version of herself, someone frivolous and vain, who only cared about things like not flying economy and only being able to drink champagne and never sparkling. When he finished, it was Ben's turn to be afraid of the reaction, as Nicolina simply looked down at her phone with no expression. She tapped a few keys, then put her phone back in her bag, not saying a word until the Uber arrived at Ben's house. When she got out of the car with him, he asked what she was doing. She told him that she'd changed the drop-off to one address and that she would be staying at his place tonight. George extended his trip back in Canada and was gone for almost 2 months. Ben and Nicolina spent almost the entire time together. Nicolina was going to break it off with George as soon as he returned, waiting to do it face to face. But when George did come back, he was 20 pounds lighter and incredibly weary. It turned out that he extended his trip because his mother had been diagnosed with breast cancer and begun treatment. He needed to go back and see her regularly, and Nicolina felt too guilty breaking it off at first. George would leave and come back every couple of weeks for months. After a few months, Nicolina felt enough time had passed to break things off with George. She was ready to do it one Friday night in September when he was due home. She had a speech prepared and everything. But the entire week before he came back, she wasn't feeling well, and she tested positive for pregnancy on the Thursday. Nicolina didn't know whether it was Ben's or George's at first, but when she told Ben this, he was incredibly hurt. He had assumed Nicolina hadn't been sleeping with George since they got together. Nicolina had assumed Ben would know she would have to. They had a huge fight and broke up, but Ben kept in contact to make sure she was okay through her pregnancy. Nicolina broke up with George anyway, not being able to stand it. She was hoping the baby would end up being Ben's. They didn't want to do a DNA test until after the baby was born, as it was the safest option for the baby. As angry as Ben was, he had softened a lot when the baby was getting closer to being born. Nicolina was sure they'd find a way back if the baby was his. But the baby wasn't Ben's. George was her dad, and George hated Nicolina for breaking up their family. He was on a warpath to make her life as miserable as possible, constantly taking her to court to try and gain full custody of Alette. Ben and Nicolina agreed never to tell any of their friends about their relationship. They acted like nothing happened at all. If the group knew, then it couldn't have survived. Ben would have made a snide remark, and Nicolina would have pounced, and the others would have had to intervene or play sides. Over time, Ben would have stopped coming to this, or Nicolina wouldn't have been invited to that. They constructed a verbal moratorium on their romance so their friendships could go on. It meant that they could go on as well, still being in each other's lives. Their relationship was artwork trapped behind a glass wall, and on the outside of it, Ben met Amina and married her in front of Nicolina under a bright summer sky. Nicolina brought Alette to Ben's birthdays, and he taught her daughter how to ride a bike. It was all they could manage, so they made it enough. When Katie died, and they realised it was Dave's date from the dinner party, they kept to their agreement. It had been well over a year since they'd seen Katie for one night at that point, and they both knew there was nothing to be gained by mentioning it. But nostalgia had been on Nicolina's mind for years, encouraged by Josh's incessant ramblings. She spent a lot of time wondering about the could-have-beens. She could never tell anyone about the happiest months of her life, but she could let the program know. Most likely nobody would ever look, but the idea they might made her feel hopeful in a way she couldn't quite describe. Adding her memories to nostalgia enabled the dinner party Josh experienced to be an accurate representation of the evening, leading him to find out new key clues. Nicolina and Ben not only both met Katie at the dinner party in 2016, but Nicolina also seemed to know Katie was involved with the Thompson brothers while she was a teenager. This was the evening's biggest surprise for Josh. Tess had first told him about the brothers while they were dating, in soft, heaving breaths. She'd not gone into too much detail, but she didn't need to. It was all quite easy to piece together once he had the basic facts. He understood how what the brothers did led directly to Jasmine's death. Tess didn't like to talk about it much, but from what Josh had gathered over the years, the brothers never experienced any consequences. Jasmine hadn't wanted anyone to know, so she never reported them. Tess was the only person she ever told about what happened, and Ashley was the only one Tess had told, other than Josh himself. But she'd told her sister, who told their cousin. Ashley was the only person at Park Days who would have known who Katie was by sight. She may have shared this story with Nicolina, but based on the dinner party that happened 2 years after the festival, it was clear Nicolina only knew Katie by name and not by face. It could only have been Ashley. But Josh couldn't focus on that quite yet because in all this, what struck him most was that he had never heard his wife mention Katie, which didn't make much sense. If Nicolina knew who she was, then surely Tess would have as well. He started wondering if Ashley had hid it from her in order to protect her somehow. Tess and Ashley were extremely close, closer than he'd ever seen two cousins or even two best friends. Ashley was always the leader of the two, taking charge when Tess's meeker personality couldn't. But Ashley had also arranged for Josh to go into nostalgia to see the dinner party. Would she really have risked exposing herself? Or perhaps she didn't know what he was really going to see. Nicolina had only recently added her memories after all. When Josh came out of the dinner party experience, it was the middle of the night. Manu had left a message for him to come to their house as soon as he left the warehouse. He found Ashley and Manu waiting in their dimly lit living room with a cup of tea for him. Ashley spoke first, saying they'd tell Josh everything he wanted to know, but to please hear her out first. It was clear whatever Ashley was about to say, Manu already knew. They were a they. Josh didn't know if the couple had been inside nostalgia and seen the same dinner party he'd just been at, but he guessed they had. Josh decided to directly ask Ashley if she was the one who took Katie's bracelet in the VIP tent. Ashley told him yes, without hesitation. She did not appear to feel guilty or upset. She told him matter-of-factly, like she was answering a question about the weather. Ashley explained that the festival was the first time she had seen Katie in over 10 years. She had known her when they were both children. Ashley paused for Josh to take it in. He didn't seem to react, but his face grew hot. Everything he understood about his friends and his wife crumbling before him. Katie and Jasmine had been best friends from early childhood. They grew up just a few streets from each other. Ashley noticed Josh stiffen when she mentioned this, realizing Tess must have known Katie too. She confirmed it for him quickly, saying that they had all seen each other almost every day when they were young. Jasmine and Katie had met over finger paint and sandpits when they were in nursery school, continuing their education together from that moment on. Ashley and Tess were just 2 years behind, always begging to tag along to play jump rope after school with the older girls. It was Jasmine who had given Katie the bracelet for her 13th birthday as physical proof of their long-lasting friendship. That same year, Katie discovered boys. She lingered by the chain-link fence whenever grade 8 boys shot basketballs on the far court, imagining herself at the centre of their laughter. Katie, who had always bent over backwards to please anyone who'd look her way, thought her days were numbered. If she didn't get a boyfriend soon, she was doomed to be known as a loser for the rest of high school. Jasmine, still glued to her Disney Channel marathons, spent evenings teaching herself dance routines to pop songs. Boys noticed her first. Her hair caught the street light on its own, and her gentle laugh drifted farther than Katie's bolder voice. Katie watched the way they passed Jasmine the ball in PE, her stomach twisting into something that felt hot and heavy. Rather than fight it, Katie turned it into strategy, telling her peers that she and Jasmine were a package deal. Either they both could come to parties, or neither could. It was how Darren and Jai Thompson had first met Jasmine, through Katie's eager pitch. The brothers, 15 and 17, had swaggered into that local park wearing scuffed trainers and long side fringes that had been set so securely in gel they formed a weapon. Katie thought they were impossibly cool and they'd all swapped MSN screen names before the picnic ended. One weekend, Katie invited Jasmine around for a sleepover while her parents were out for the night. Jasmine thought it was just going to be a regular sleepover where they'd watch movies and order pizza like they'd done many times before. But Katie had invited Darren and Jai without telling her. The details of what happened next are not just awful and gratuitous, but easily guessable. The boys brought punch and sat beside them on the couch to watch the movie. The girls don't remember anything past the opening credits. When they woke up, their clothes were damp and their muscles ached. Katie seemed to realize first what had happened, begging Jasmine not to tell anyone. Her parents couldn't know. Jasmine couldn't even say it to herself, so there was no danger in her saying it to anyone else. After that night, their lives forked in opposite directions, despite Katie's best efforts to keep them together. Katie glued herself to MySpace profiles, posting selfies in every glittery outfit she could find, chasing the illusion of safety inside boyfriends' arms. Each new relationship was a shield against the memories she refused to face. Jasmine, by contrast, found the world outside her bedroom a trap.
Parents always trying to check in, teachers always following up on missed homework, friends who wouldn't stop asking where she was. She curled up under her duvet whenever she could. Katie knocked on her door every afternoon, trying any excuse to get her best friend outside. But Jasmine's trust had cracked. Her parents, alarmed, sent her to counselling, but her mind kept filling in the blanks of those 2 hours she'd been out, every imagining worse than the last. She began to slip away behind her closed door until, at 15, she never left her bedroom again. Katie left their school the next term. Ashley said it was because she couldn't face Tess and the repercussions of what she'd done. This part Josh knew from Tess herself. Jasmine had told her what had happened not long before she died. Perhaps it was because Tess was 13 herself at the time, and she was going to her first ever middle school party. Sister to sister, she was trying to warn her of the dangers of being a teenager. Instead, she just terrified Tess, and that terror turned to despair soon after, when Tess came home from school to an ambulance wailing outside her house. Jasmine had made her little sister promise on everything she had that she wouldn't tell anyone, especially her parents. Tess had crossed her heart, and her sister died. It was the last promise she ever made her. She wanted to keep it so desperately, but it weighed on her mind every day of her teenage life. Ashley, so attuned to her cousin's every emotion, especially after all that had happened, seized it out of her after too long. It became their secret, their vow to Jasmine. When Josh heard all this, he started to think it made sense Tess had left Katie out of the story, even though it bothered him. Tess had told him what had happened to Jasmine had happened at a friend's house. Maybe at that point, Katie's part in it just didn't seem so important to the overall picture anymore. He couldn't remember anything about Tess reacting to the news of Katie's death. He could only remember his own memory of finding out while he was at work, and how horrified he was. Tess would have probably been at her own place of work at the time. He probably spoke to her about it, but he doesn't remember. Tess likely had a strong dislike of Katie, so perhaps she didn't want to speak ill of the dead, Josh tried to reason. Ashley all but confirmed this when Josh asked. But to go back to how it all connects to the bracelet, Ashley and Tess both had been there when Jasmine had gifted Katie the bracelet for her birthday. It had meant a lot to Katie, who seemed to never take it off. Ashley said she was always wearing it any time they would see each other as kids. But of course, when Katie changed schools after Jasmine died, Ashley never saw her again. Katie's parents moved to Newtown to be near the school and give Katie a fresh start, only knowing that Jasmine had died and fearing something similar for their daughter. On that night in the VIP tent, it was the first time Ashley had seen Katie in almost 10 years. There was only one makeshift stall in the VIP tent, which Ashley had been waiting outside of with Shanti. Manu had come up to talk to them while they waited for whoever was in the stall to come out. It was the first time Ashley and Manu had had a proper conversation. Everything was civil. But then Katie came out of the stall. Katie didn't even seem to see Ashley at first, moving to walk straight past her. Ashley said she froze and was going to let her just walk away. But then she saw the bracelet on Katie's wrist. Ashley said she felt as though she experienced an exorcism of sorts. When she had found out about what had happened with the brothers, Jasmine was already gone, and Ashley had never seen Katie again. She'd spent so many years hating those boys and going over the scene in her mind. She'd been disgusted by Katie, by how stupid she was for letting it happen. She never realized how much she hated her until she saw that bracelet hanging from her wrist. All this rage Ashley didn't know she had just came spilling out, and when she screamed, Katie quickly realized who she was. Manu said it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Katie went white as a ghost, while Ashley just started wailing at her, somewhere between sobbing and screaming. Ashley grabbed Katie's wrist, asking her why she'd still be wearing this after what she'd done. Katie had looked mortified and quickly taken the bracelet off, shoving it into Ashley's hand before running off. Manu remembered a soft, "I'm sorry," coming from Katie as she did it, but Ashley had no recollection of it.
Josh had so many questions. Had Ashley kept the bracelet for 3 years before she killed Katie? Had Manu always known about this? Was he not freaked out by Ashley having this outburst, given it was the first time they'd met? He stopped himself from asking, figuring he'd learn more if he didn't interject. Manu took Ashley aside after Katie ran out of the VIP tent. He listened and calmed her down. It was their first point of connection. Ashley was embarrassed, but Manu didn't make her feel that way. He understood what it was like to feel inexplicably angry sometimes. Manu told her he was quiet, not because he was shy, but because he was always afraid of exploding. His family had to leave India when he was a child because of unrest, and his family lost their big house, their comfortable life, and their entire community. His father, once a respected professor, now worked quietly at a service station. It was honest work, but Manu always felt the weight of what had been lost. His father's brilliance still shone, but only at home. The family lived in a tiny flat and were treated like outsiders, without anybody to lean on. They talked for hours after that, and had never really left each other's side again. Ashley told Manu everything that night. He'd known so much more than Josh ever had about Katie, all before she died. The world's a small place, especially when all your friends are from the same collection of towns in England's west. Mav is the only one in the group Josh hadn't unearthed a connection to Katie. But now the main question Josh needed answered was about the bracelet. How did it get back to Katie 3 years later? Ashley told him she'd given it to Tess after she'd come home from Park Days. Ashley didn't want it in her house. She hated physical reminders of pain, but knew she couldn't just throw it away. Tess clung to every little piece of jasmine, so was happy to take it, even if Ashley was unsure it was right. This is where Ashley stopped the story. "I think it would be better to show you the rest," she'd said. It was going to be a confession via virtual reality. Ashley's plan was to leave all the clues to solving why Katie had died inside the program, ready for discovery whenever someone cared to look. But she didn't want the truth to come out while she was still alive, so she had to arrange clues within the program, so it would take time to put the pieces together. This was all before Ashley had started working at Nostalgia and had ever been inside herself. She didn't know what details were already inside. The first time she went in, it was purely a surveillance mission. There were key memories Ashley knew would be the biggest clues to solving Katie's murder. The VIP tent, the night Katie had died, all the times she'd ever discussed Katie's death with Manu. Nostalgia had none of it. There were hints there, but nothing that could tangibly connect Ashley with Katie's death. Ashley could have stopped there, but she felt the guilt niggling away at her soul. Without a confession, nobody would ever really know what happened to Katie. Ashley had been counting on being found out eventually. On the nights when she couldn't stop tossing and turning, the thought of the world getting to know, and Katie's family getting an answer, was what could finally send her to sleep. Ashley never anticipated being able to die as an innocent. After seeing that Nostalgia had nothing on her, she knew a confession was Katie's only chance at justice. She wasn't brave or moral enough to sacrifice the rest of her life to prison, and saw it only as a small redemption to offer her legacy instead. By the time Ashley confessed all this to Josh, she had already placed a number of memories inside Nostalgia, but she hadn't placed the key one, the night Katie died. It was the memory she wanted to show Josh now. She had already placed everything else inside, but she'd need to scan a final time to make her mission complete. Ashley and Manu had looked warily at each other when she'd admitted this. The look they shared suggested it was something they had discussed heavily, when this memory should go in. Ashley said it was time, and got up to make a call. Josh asked Manu how he could have kept this to himself all these years. Manu said it wasn't so difficult. Katie didn't come up all that much, and it was a case of being loyal to his wife. The only person Manu had loyalty to ahead of Josh. Josh knew he couldn't begrudge his friend that. When Ashley came back, she told Josh they needed to head back to the Nostalgia warehouse again. She had arranged for him to see a memory from the night of November 28th, 2017. The night Katie died. Josh felt truly afraid for the first time since this whole thing had started. He didn't want to see it. He just wanted Ashley to tell him. But she insisted. All three of them went to the warehouse and were guided into an experience room. Ashley got her scan, while Josh and Manu watched in nervous silence. Manu told his friend that Ashley wouldn't be able to go inside with him, as she was there that night. If Ashley went in, her A user, that is, active user, would replace her echo and he wouldn't see it as it really happened. But Manu said he could go in with him. Josh had been holding a silent question through Ashley's story about whether Manu was in attendance. It was a small relief to know he wasn't present when Katie was killed. The two of them got set up and were inside their capsules very quickly after Ashley's scan was complete. She told them she'd be waiting when they came out. Josh looked at Ashley as the capsule shut. She looked worried more than she did scared. The image of a parkland with dense trees appeared in Josh's vision. As it got closer, he realized they were going to be on a riverbank. The sound of rushing water got louder until he felt the soft ground beneath his feet. It seemed like they were in the middle of a forest, but Manu told him it was only a country park. It was 5 p.m. on a rainy day at the beginning of winter, so there's nobody else around. Manu directed them to stand beside the trees a few feet from the river's edge. There was a clear patch of riverbank before them, muddy from the rain earlier in the day. Then he heard the sound of soft chatter coming from the trees. A 25-year-old Ashley, her curly dark hair flowing over a knitted green jumper, appeared behind them carrying flowers. The strangest part for Josh wasn't seeing Ashley looking so young, but how vividly he remembered her looking like this once she was before him. If you had asked him yesterday what she had looked like during this time, he would have had a watery picture. But now, with her long curls bouncing as she moved, his memory was alive. Manu asked Josh if he remembered what date the 28th of November was, gesturing to the flowers Ashley was holding. It took him a moment. November 28th was Jasmine's birthday. Then Manu asked if he remembered what that meant right as they heard Ashley yell back into the trees. "Have you got it?" She was with someone. A sweet voice yelled back, "Got it." Josh inhaled sharply as his 25-year-old wife appeared from the trees. Tess, with her long strawberry blonde hair and big white puffer jacket, emerged from the trees, looking every bit as lovely as Josh remembered on her wedding day. She was holding a Bluetooth speaker in one hand and a picnic rug in the other. Ashley and Tess would spend Jasmine's birthday together every year as long as Josh had known them. He never asked too many questions about what they do, sensing it was private between them. As much as Josh always tried to support Tess through the loss of her sister, he hadn't known Jasmine. He knew it was important to Tess to celebrate her sister with someone who knew and loved her like she did. The two young women walked towards the water, stopping a few feet from the edge, and laid down the picnic rug. It looked like it had been raining earlier in the day, but had stopped for a few hours. The cousins sat down, playing Britney Spears from the speaker and throwing flowers into the water one by one as they spoke to Jasmine. Tess told her sister all about Josh, this wonderful guy who she thinks might really be the one. They'd been seeing each other for almost 2 years at this point. Ashley spoke of her job worries and how Manu was a rock for her through it all. Then she commented how it was funny it looked like she and Tess were going to end up with two best friends. The girls continued to talk, but nothing seemed to be significant enough for Josh to need to hear. It was odd for them to be here. It was almost dark and a miserable day. Tess had never really liked nature and spooked easily. Manu told him this wasn't far from Tess and Jasmine's childhood home in Elverley. They would come down to the river to listen to music and make up dances as kids when their mum didn't want them making too much noise in the house. Ashley and Katie would always come with them. Josh looked at Tess and her too big jacket and perfect freckled nose. Her beautiful face stained with tears, faintly smiling as she spoke to her sister. She was the least sinister thing he could imagine. Why hadn't she told him she knew Katie? The music stopped, as if the playlist had finished. Ashley leaned her head against Tess's shoulder, saying they'd better go. Tess collected the speaker, telling her sister they'd bring her back out again next year. Ashley joked that maybe one of them would have a ring by then, and they laughed. Tears stained Tess's cheeks. She didn't seem the kind of upset she always seemed to get when Jasmine was brought up. There was no lament, just fondness. Just as the women went to get up, and Josh for a naively hopeful moment thought maybe this meant the girls weren't responsible for Katie's death, a rustle of keys was heard from the trees. Both Ashley and Tess seemed startled, being alone in the middle of the park. Katie appeared through the leaves, trying to fish something from the large bag over her shoulder. It took her a moment to look up and see the two cousins and their horrified faces as she approached. She'd come through Newtown that day for an open home she conducted, before visiting her mother. This spot on the river, just outside Alverley, was on her way back home to Birmingham. It seemed Katie commemorated Jasmine's birthday too. Tess was usually such a serene person. She would get angry very rarely, but after so many years together, Josh knew the signs as to when she was going to explode. Her face started to go red, and her breathing was erratic. Ashley's mortification at the unfolding scene was apparent as she quickly grabbed Tess's arm and tried to gesture for them to leave. Tess shrugged her cousin off, and 12 years of pent-up resentment and blame poured out in a tirade, pummeling into Katie. Tess didn't make much sense. It was a bunch of, "What the hell are you doing here? How dare you?" talk. Tess started sobbing, and Katie could only stand there in wide-eyed horror. Ashley later said the only time she'd ever seen Tess like that before was when Jasmine died. Seeing Katie seemed to take Tess right back to where it all happened. The sweet moment of acceptance the cousins had shared was gone. Tess knew it wasn't Katie's fault, really. Ashley and Tess had talked about it once, about how they knew they shouldn't blame her, even though part of them always would. But in that moment, that part became all Tess could see. "You don't have the right," Tess sobbed at her. Ashley placed her hands delicately on her cousin's shoulders, gently trying to tug her away. There was no doubt as to the horror that whipped through Katie. She looked like she'd been eviscerated, staring at the little girl she'd taught to braid her hair. Tess looked so much like Jasmine, but fairer, smaller. Katie quickly glanced at the trees with a desperate look on her face, as if to see if someone else was there. She seemed resigned when she looked back up at Tess and whispered, "I know." It was the voice of someone broken. Tess and Katie just stared at each other, their faces stained with the pain of a decade-long trauma. Tess would later tell Ashley that in that moment, she understood that Katie felt pain too. She hadn't really thought about it much before. Katie had become the big bad witch in her mind. Gone was the cool older girl she'd once idolized, who taught her to braid her hair and how to do hopscotch. Once Jasmine died, Katie never came back to school. Tess had not seen her again, so Katie was divided into two people. The girl she'd known when Jasmine was alive was a fake, a coward, a jealous frenemy. The girl who disappeared after her sister died was a witch. But the woman who stood before her was a broken, guilt-ridden, lonely sort. Her hair was messily coming out of a loose single braid. "I'm sorry," Katie said. "I can't tell you how sorry," was all she could get out before she sobbed. There had been nights when Tess had wished for Katie to feel guilt for the rest of her life, that it would curse her until the day she died. But she didn't consider her despair, her grief, how horrific that would be when it was laced with guilt. Tess knew the previous versions of herself that had stayed up late at night, stewing while imagining Katie at parties, Katie being asked on dates, Katie getting a new best friend, would never have understood the emotion she was now feeling as she stared into Katie's red-rimmed eyes. "Do you think about her?" Tess asked gently. Katie's right hand went up to hold the empty space on her left wrist. "All the time," Katie answered. Tess's eyes filled with tears as she said, "Me too." She considered the young woman before her, who had always seemed larger than life in her memory. When they were little, 2 years seemed like an eternity. Katie at 13 had lived a lifetime more than Tess at 11, and yet Tess would never have done something so stupid, so selfish, and Tess knew Katie wasn't stupid. But now they were two adult women who should have long moved on from childhood and teenage heartaches, stuck mentally in adolescence, dragged back by a singular event.
Do you think they'll ever pay? Those boys?
Tess asked.
Those men, I suppose now.
The wind picked up and howled between them. Katie yelled over it.
For what they do, or they've done to someone else maybe. I hope whoever was next try.
Tess flickered for a moment before she gave a soft nod.
I know Jasmine didn't want anybody to know, but sometimes I wonder about going to the police, or at least social media. I don't know if it'd be a good thing for us, but I want them to have some kind of consequence so badly.
Tess was surprised. She didn't think Jasmine had spoken to anyone but her about her shame.
She told you not to tell anyone?
Tess asked.
It was our last conversation. She was embarrassed.
Katie said the last word quietly, almost in a hiss that disappeared beneath the wind.
Never should have invited them over.
Tess didn't say anything back. Katie continued wringing her wrist and took a few steps towards the water. She closed her eyes and took a breath in.
I wish she was here all the time.
Tess considered Katie for a moment, then took a few steps to join her beside the water. Ashley didn't follow. Tears brimmed as she stood still and watched Tess join Katie, sensing this moment might finally unravel some of their tightly wound grief. Josh couldn't remember later how long the three stood there in their places, silent as the wind and water rushed around them. Being in the physical space with them, he felt attuned to the emotion of it all. Tess unclasped the bracelet from her wrist. She held it in her hands for a moment, fiddling with the silver heart dangling from its center. Without saying anything, she reached across and dropped the bracelet into Katie's hand.
You should have this back,
she said. Jasmine had given it to Katie after all. Tess just had one final question. Katie had said they shouldn't have invited the brothers over that fateful night. Who were they? Katie seemed confused. She and Jasmine had invited them over. They had met the brothers at a park gathering the weekend before and invited them around to watch a movie the following weekend. Tess balked at the information. It was Katie who had invited them. Jasmine didn't even know they were going to be there that night. Katie protested. She admitted it was her idea and Jasmine was nervous, but she agreed to have them over. Jai had been nice to Jasmine at the park. She thought he was cute. Tess screamed that Katie was a liar. Katie stumbled back at the outburst, tripping on the rocks behind her. She went down and Ashley yelped as Katie's head collided with a rock on the edge of the riverbed. Ashley replayed this moment in her head for years to come. Tess had lunged and Katie had fallen. That part was always clear. Later she would swear to Manu there hadn't been a push. But when the events were fresh, she was sure there had been one.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.
The story continues in the next episode.